Hello, this is Future Perfect Book Club.
I'm Bronson.
And I'm Joel Goodman. This is episode 1, and we just read Cyberboss, The Rise of Algorithmic Management and the New Struggle for Control at Work by Craig Gent. Ron, I'm so excited to start this podcast.
For those at home, Joel and I have known each other a very long time. And it's a shock to anyone who's known us a long time to think that we never had a podcast together.
Yeah.
And one reason is you want to stay friends so you don't make a podcast. But then we finally got a good idea for one.
Well, and our conversations are always great when we're together. And we've always talked about how we should just be recording them anyway. And so I'm particularly excited to be reading the same book with you and then talking about it, because your background in design and digital transformation and change management and civic work and education work and all kinds of other stuff I think is super, super interesting. And, I also want to talk about your consequence design framework and how you think about how design affects everything that we do in our daily lives. Like I'm excited to be able to dig in and take these books that seem consequential, or maybe they prove to be consequential, because we're definitely going to hit some classics at some point during this series.
We definitely are. So the one good thing about us knowing each other really well is we know each other's strengths and what we're into. And so Joel, of course, beyond all of his work, is like a design systems and working in front-end development for a long time, obviously a business owner, agency owner. Joel's real passion is actually semiotics and media studies. So Joel got me into a lot of that stuff. Like wasn't really engaging with McLuhan back in like the 2015s when we were like kind of really becoming really good friends. And I've gone on my own journey now to deeply getting into more critical theory. But really, it started with a lot of our earlier conversations around you being like, oh, you should read this. Hey, here's this quote. And so I'm really pumped that we get to do a thing that allows you to delve into stuff that you've been talking about for a really long time. Like, you didn't just start on this train. You've been deeply embedded in this space for a long time. And I think that a lot of that thinking is super relevant where we are in the world right now, and this sort of crossroads of all technology and obviously media and critical media converging in this really, frankly, sort of destructive way, frankly.
Honestly, we see it all the time, and there's just so much going on. And I think we're just gonna hit tons of that in this series. I'm really excited. So let's kick it off, Ron. Book number 1, you made the recommendation for it. We were reading Cyberboss by Craig Gent. What do you think? Give us a synopsis.
So for those at home who have not quite read this book yet, Cyberboss is talking a lot about algorithmic management and how platforms are controlling work in this sort of modern economy. And as someone who spends a lot of time thinking about more about like local like cities and the way atomization and thinking about the ways that algorithms are ruling the way that we live our lives, I've been talking a lot about disintermediation. So things that used to be like person to person are now being interrupted by algorithms. Who knows who built it? We don't know what they're doing. And so this book gets into that and really gets in the weeds on it. But it's also kind of breezy. Like I told Joel, I'm like, it's kind of short. We can get through it. And we did. What did I think? So for me, the parts that I thought were interesting, obviously, were like some of the confirmed things that I had known about related to things like, a lot of the ride sharing apps and things and the ways folks are leveraging these things, but also getting in the weeds of like how distant these platforms are from their workers. So how there's a guy in one of the chapters talking about how he got the job, he didn't talk to one for 3 weeks, and it wasn't until he missed a couple of days of work that he got to talk to somebody, and it wasn't even like it was a big deal. They were like, all right, you go back on the road now.
Yeah.
And so that tripped me out a little bit. So lots of stories like that of hearing these anecdotes is what I think I found the most valuable in it.
I found those stories really enlightening, and I think they were definitely the part that keeps you a little bit more engaged, because at some point it shifts into this sort of dystopian outlook on life, right? And you realize, Craig interviewed a ton of people for this study. There's a lot of research, a lot of interviewing that went behind creating this work, and he goes into Amazon distribution centers. While he talks to people, he kind of went covertly into an Amazon distribution center in the UK a couple of times. But talking to these workers that are in the Amazon facilities or major distributors for grocery stores, or like you said, the ride share and food delivery folks, it's so interesting the ways that the bad, I guess, or like what I consider the dystopian side of it, is kind of hidden. I don't know if it's purposeful. I don't know if it's like just very enterprise thinking around it, but it was interesting to see the contrast of this looks very dystopian from the outside. It looks very computer controlled workers doing, worker bee type of stuff without any kind of autonomy. And, at times talking about how the algorithms have gotten so specific to the point where that worker only knows what their next step is. They don't know anything else. They have no autonomy within the process that, or at least the algorithms are trying to force them into not having any autonomy during their work days. That was interesting, and in contrast especially to how the people in those jobs respond to it and how they think about it and how they react to it in different ways. Because there is a part of this book that takes a critical eye to how effective, I guess, trade unions are in supporting these workers and getting them more rights.
Yeah, I chose not to engage with any of those parts of it
It's probably
just
good.
because because so many of these books tend to go in that direction, and this is just a personal critique that I
Sure.
have. Y'all can at me if you want about this, but so much of tech people right now, it seems like their answer to everything is, "Oh, you should organize your coworkers," and I'm like, I've most of the time I've been in unions have been like jobs that I had part time when I taught at university. You joined the union. When I was an intern at the Boston Globe when I was out of college, they made the interns join the union. Like, so it's small situations, but like it almost feels glib. Folks are just looking for some kind of systemic way to like push the issues of what's really happening.
My media studies heart and semiotic brain really latched onto how algorithms have been elevated to this kind of godlike status. And there's a whole section in here where Craig talks about the relationship of how the internal cultures that these algorithms kind of create correspond with religion in a lot of different ways. I hadn't really thought about that. When you think about how you walk around anywhere, like I work with higher education institutions a lot. And as they're weighing new technologies, they're always thinking, the algorithm, but the algorithm's greater. We talk to, my friends that are social media managers, right? Oh, we have to control our algorithm. And the algorithm ends up being the end all be all. We serve that algorithm in some way. And this is just on a very specific, very insular, very consequential way of the algorithm messing with someone's life because it is their livelihood. It is how they're going to progress in life, cover their bills, that sort of thing. And so, yeah, I want to kind of talk about that a little bit and kind of what your thoughts are on that, Ron, because you and I, and everyone we know, we're very drawn to the convenience of these platforms. But we also know these stories. We've heard the stories of how back in the day with Uber and Lyft, or Uber especially, the dangers of drivers or the dangers of riders with drivers, them being potentially attacked or assaulted in some way. Also the pay issues around all this. And there are all kinds of weird, sticky things all the way down that can be a little bit tough to talk about. Well, why do you think we're just drawn to the convenience despite knowing some of those things?
Being the resident Trekkie of this conversation, for the non-Trekkies, just roll with this. Look it up on your phone. There's something very alluring about replicators. This idea that instant, just-in-time, magical, it shows up. And obviously there are other ways to sort of interrogate this, right? But I think you think about the future, it's just the robots are bringing you a thing. And how cool is it that I push a button and it'll be here by 6 p.m.? Oh my
Right.
gosh, that's amazing. And so, it's the future George Jetson wanted for us. And frankly, I guess, taking a less cheeky stance about it, thinking about it from a pure convenience perspective. You're a parent. You can save that hour a day. How can you use that hour? And if I don't have to go to the store, I want the same things, but I'm not concerned about where it comes from. I just need to have it so that it gives me the time to do other things because we
Right.
are stretched more than we used to be.
Right.
So I I don't judge anybody for not accepting the world as it is. Yeah, we all go into Kmart or whatever if you live in the US, but like I don't lament the loss of these experiences because frankly, the in-store experience has been diminished so poorly. Like there's nothing really nostalgic about it to me in the current state because it doesn't feel like it used to.
Right.
But I think honestly, it's just people are stressed, they're afraid, they got a lot going on, and I get it. Like I understand why having this proliferation of platforms that allow you to do these do things you were going to do anyway. That's the key. Maybe you're buying more, but at the end of the day, you were doing this before, and
Yeah.
now it's just easier to do it, irrespective of the externalities, right?
Yeah, for sure. I feel the same way. I think there's, to your point about, replication and the instantaneous gratification of something showing up and it feeling magical and whatever serotonin hit that brings us. We see that all over the place in kind of lighter, more shallow levels, right? I think that's the appeal of using generative AI, despite that we know it's destroying the environment, and it sucks up so much energy and power in a lot of ways, like not knowing kind of what has gone into it. And even though we do know what's gone into training these things, like we're still using it, right? There's this magic quality to it. But once you see how this sort of efficiency at all costs behind the scenes work happens, that's where I get a little mad, actually. And it goes back to the algorithm as God cultural argument. Like, it doesn't matter what the consequences are in the long run or even in the short term. We have to serve that algorithm, because that algorithm is the thing that's telling us what, the next song is going to come up on Spotify or Apple Music or Tidal or whatever. It's the thing that's going to suggest the next meal from DoorDash, or it's the thing that's going to suggest the next thing to purchase on Amazon.com. And we have to feel like we have control over it, but the reverse actually is happening. We're actually in service of that algorithm because it's all made to kind of subjugate our wants and subjugate our time.
For people, like I said, reading at home and thinking about the book, it's actually a section of the book talks about this in page 167. It says, just trust the system. It's like, it's quite quasi-religious, actually, in talking about how these things are everywhere. It really is something people don't really engage with in a critical way. They just think of like the back end of it.
Yeah, just trust the system. And that's been a workplace mantra for a very, very long time, right? And I mean, even as a business owner, when I talk to other business owners or managers or CEOs, people in those positions, it's just like, oh, just trust. You have a system in place, just trust the system and everything's going to turn out fine. But when that system becomes something that's programmed and relatively autonomous, you can't question that system at all because you don't even know what the system is, right? At least as a business owner, I know what systems I put in place because I probably wrote them, or I worked with someone to write them, and collaborated with them. But when that system is a mathematical equation and a system of software that is making predictive choices or very consequential choices, managing people's time, when they work, if they can work, that sort of stuff. It's a different thing because it's detached from humanity, right? It's detached from an actual person.
You actually have me thinking about a quote from page 17 where he talks about just-in-time logistics. And time is always money. It was in fact supermarkets' enduring obsession with efficiency and minimizing waste, including the workforce, that sabotaged their ability to fill their own shelves. So we saw this during the pandemic, right? With all toilet paper and all the, different things that were not being provided. Obviously some of these were supply chain issues, but a lot of this is that stores have gotten so good at hyper efficiency and knowing what people are going to buy that they buy what they need so that there's not any waste, so that they save, a few dollars on the back end. But this caused some severe problems in a, once in a lifetime situation, certainly relative to the world we live in. And so I really appreciated him digging into, I think this has been an interesting trend. We're going to see more and more books contending with the pandemic era. Not that we're out of it, but that era we were all locked in our houses.
Yeah.
To really reflect on ways that the system failed, because there were so many fissures in the system at that time that were not super clear to us before. And it was really interesting for me to see, I think for a lot of us, to see sort of the breakdowns of those things that always just seemed to work and not quite understanding exactly why and where those things were. So him getting into that was really interesting for me.
Yeah. We definitely, I mean, we see that during natural disasters too, right? I mean, my wife and I lived through the giant freezes that happened in Texas several years ago that kind of ruined the power grid. And it was the same sort of thing. No toilet paper, everything's gone. But you see that during any sort of pre-warning natural disaster sort of thing. And that's because these algorithms are built, this just-in-time fulfillment, distribution, logistics type of stuff is built to work in precedented times, in normal times, normal operation, right? There aren't backups for, I mean, it's kind of like the Great Depression. There's no backup for when there's a run on the banks. I mean, there kind of is now, but like, it's that same sort of thing. What do you do when a wrench is thrown into that system? One of the things that I'm really kind of stuck on is what the implications of these different control structures are. One of the big points that he makes in the book is that at some point when the algorithm is kind of controlling everything, right? The managers or the supervisors, actually, I think he says the supervisors become subvisors because they don't really have any control either. There's this layer between upper management and then everyone else. And you have kind of a two-class system below the algorithm where it's supervisors, which really don't do anything. They're there as like backup help maybe, like, but they can't really do anything anyway with that. It's just like, oh, algorithm said something and someone has a question, they can answer the question. But mostly all they're doing is serving the algorithm, again, making sure that, yep, that person was clocked in for the right amount of time, they worked the right amount of hours, they're hitting their efficiency levels. But then even that, they can't do anything about those efficiency levels except for chastise and maybe do some sort of workplace punishment for those, for people not hitting those specific efficiency goals, right? That's where it kind of scares me a little bit. You mentioned earlier, one of the people that he interviewed talked about how this is the job where he has spoken the least to anyone. Like there's just no communication. And I think that's a direct consequence of the algorithm being the thing that is running everything. It detaches the actual person from anything else, right? Like it sucks the humanity out and they become workers. I think it was in this book. It might be something else. I think it was in this book. He talks about how it's just become more affordable to hire people because they're disposable than to put robots in place doing this stuff. Because some people will ask that, right? Like, well, why doesn't Amazon have robots that are picking these things and packing them up for distribution? It's because you then have to hire someone that is skilled to fix that robot, and they're going to cost more on top of the robot than just hiring a bunch of people that don't need any special skills and replacing them when they burn out or quit or aren't hitting the efficiency levels that you need them to. It has nothing to do with humans whatsoever. It's only about how useful they are to the corporate structure.
Yeah, I think you bringing up the dehumanizing worker dignity piece of this, which he talks about really throughout the book, really, right? Talking about workers and working conditions. Do you think that people really have contended, like everyday people have contended with the downstream effects of these platforms on the people who are doing the work? Like based on what I see online, that is not the case. Like people on Reddit do not. Like, why did my DoorDash slave bring me my food faster?
Right.
I'm not gonna tip him anything. In fact, it should be paying me for the food.
Yeah. No, I mean, that happens all the time. And I think even from that perspective, I think a reliance on these sort of technology and algorithmically driven delivery type services, there are other things with that, but like delivery services or digital experiences, it affects how we interact with other industries as well. Like, I mean, when you feel so entitled to your cheeseburger showing up on your porch, even though it's going to be cold and it's not going to taste as good as picking it up from the drive-thru or whatever, that filters over to when you go out to an actual restaurant and how you treat the hospitality staff that are working in person and are working hard. And they're in jobs that are supposedly more humanizing because the majority of the hospitality industry is not run on algorithmic scheduling and things like that yet. I think there was actually a comment in the book. One of the delivery drivers said, if I was working at a bar or restaurant, like, sure, they can cut me early, but at least I know why I was cut early. I know that there wasn't the traffic.
Yeah, you saying that reminds me of the times I've been in ride shares, which frankly, I think ride shares are terrible. It shouldn't exist. But but I also use them. And one of the things I like to do when I use them is to ask the drivers often, how do you like this? Like, talk to me about the app a little bit. Like, I just love knowing more about this because your boss is the app, right? And it's
Yeah.
at this point, it's so sophisticated. In the old days, it was much less sophisticated. It is so sophisticated now that they really do work for this app. And it's interesting because across the board, they all like it because it gives them a chance to work when they want to and they get paid and
Sure.
bonuses and blah, 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 blah. And I've heard all kinds of stories at this point about, bonus rides but my favorite one is I've had this happen more than once in different cities all over America where the driver is done for the day and doesn't want any more rides because the app will give you rides and I guess you get docked for turning them down. They say, hey, you're almost at your spot. Do you mind me turning? I'm gonna say you're there already. I'm gonna take you there, but I want to stop getting offers because what's gonna happen is it's gonna take me. I'm on my way home because I'm taking you. But if I'm not careful, it's gonna take me further away from home.
Right.
And then it's gonna cost me money basically. And I'm like, no, Now I know, because it's happened enough times that I know when I get asked this. It's probably happened 5 or 6 times, where it's like, "Hey, you mind me?" I'm like, "No, you're good, man. I know what's going on." And they're like, "Oh, thank you so much." Like,
Yeah.
but it's wild because, again, to your point, if my boss was you, "Hey, Joel, I'm done for the day. I'm gonna clock out and go home. All right, man. See you tomorrow. Good job today."
Yeah. Right.
But you can't talk to your robot boss about that because your
Right.
robot boss doesn't know you exist as a person,
Yeah.
right? It's a video game.
Yeah, it's built to give you that next step and to dock you if you don't comply, right? It's all about that compliance. It's well, so this is interesting. I wrote down a note when I was reading, and I think I think that's a good example, specifically the ride sharing drivers. But like, there's kind of two sides of this. There's algorithms like enhancing control, but the same side or another side of the same coin, I think, is it gives you also an illusion of control, right? So like with those drivers, yeah, it kind of gives them more control over what they're doing, but at some point that tips into it's really only a facade. You know, you think you're in control and that you're running your own business because you're an independent contractor, whatever else. But at some point, where does that become detrimental? And how do you as a worker cope with figuring that out? You've got to figure out kind of what that line is. And the problem is that the algorithms and well, and the people in charge of the algorithms as well, like they'll notice that, oh, well, efficiency is going down. Someone's figured this out. We can change the goalpost. We can move that somewhere else. So you don't know where that line is at anymore. And that's one of those tactics that happens in these distribution fulfillment centers, right? Where you have a quota where you're supposed to get a certain amount of work done, and you may or may not know what that quota is. And I would argue that the bad companies are the ones that don't tell you what that quota is. But the point is that if you aren't hitting that quota, you're going to be told that you're not hitting your quota and you need to do better, and that there's going to be disciplinary action. You might get fired. You may not be called back for another shift, whatever else. That's the part that creates a ton of stress for people, right? When you don't actually know what your goal is and you're just working blindly, and the fear of retribution is still hanging over your head, like that's got to be incredibly stressful. But I don't even think most people know that that happens. Most of us that don't work in those positions don't realize the incredible amount of stress that those workers are under.
Boy, you got me thinking 3 different things at once here. I'm gonna talk about a quote from the book that touches on this, and then I'm gonna talk a little bit about Taylorism, and then I've got an anecdote about Finland, because it wouldn't be a podcast with me on it if Finland didn't come up.
True.
But and this is in the beginning of the book. He talks about, in many ways, the jobs that are now being created are less secure, more stringently managed, and paid worse relative to the cost of living than ever before. And left unchecked, this may well lead to forms of work that are increasingly stressful, injurious, and dehumanizing.
Yeah.
Which is like, yeah, right? And we all know. What's funny is people, of course, these days, again, spending a lot of time online, there are many folks who believe that folks should just, what the most derisive thing people can say to you on any kind of Twitter clone, learn the code.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So this is the response to anyone having a bad job, which is awful. But I think, to your point, this is just the beginning of this. In 10 years, certainly in 20 years, this type of work will be the only way people will have ever known to have worked.
Yeah.
And it will get so efficient that you won't know anything different.
Yeah.
And that is horrifying to consider.
Yeah, it is. And everyone thinks that automation is going to make less work for everybody and more money for everybody. And we're all going to have way more free time. And that is not the case, because in capitalist structures, the way that capitalism is designed, the people that are in charge are going to make more money. Like, just because you're more efficient doesn't mean you're going to make more money. That actually means that, in a lot of ways, you're costing less for people because you have way more output and they're getting paid the exact same amount. And if they can cut corners and maximize their margin and still get people to work for very, very little money doing a good enough job, they'll continue to do that. It doesn't expand. Like, this doesn't help anyone in the bottom rungs of the socio-labor structures make more money and live better. None of it does. None of the automation does. And this isn't about taking people's jobs, right? The automation is not about taking people's jobs. It's about changing people's jobs and decreasing the amount of skill and knowledge that is needed for that work, so that everyone is on the same level, the same playing field. No one has to be better than anyone else. And it makes that gap to become a programmer or to become a manager, to become someone else that might have a shot, way wider. and way deeper, right? It just keeps expanding that chasm. And so, to your point, that those comments online, like, yeah, we'll just learn to code. Like, I mean, I know that argument. Like, I mean, Douglas Rushkoff had wrote a whole book called Program Review Programmed years and years and years ago, when there actually probably was still a chance for, for some good people to learn how to program and make some change. But that doesn't fix everything. And unless you're learning to program and code in very specific ways that, I mean, are honestly still not good. They're still working to disenfranchise people from their humanity. I don't know. It's difficult.
We're upbeat. This is the most upbeat podcast you've ever heard in your life.
Hey, I said it was dystopian. I said
we
said
did.
we get
did.
this
We warned you.
dystopian
We
part.
warned you from the start that we're fun, but this book's great. The topic, not so fun.
Not so fun. No.
You made a lot of good points. And I do want to touch on Taylorism a little bit. So for the folks at home who are not as read into Taylorism, Frederick Winslow Taylor was an American industrial engineer. For the late 1800s, he was a chief engineer at this company called Midvale Steelworks. He basically made up something called scientific management, which we named after him, called Taylorism. The basics of Taylorism, you're going to hear this and you're going to go, oh, that sounds right, is take skilled workers and break down their work into simple, repeatable tasks that managers can control, right? So
Yeah.
this is why your McDonald's and your Arby's work the way they do. But more importantly, in management and business corporations, you study how work gets done. You break down the complex jobs into simple tasks. You create strict rules for each step. Use data to monitor the workers. And then you take the knowledge from the workers, you give it to management. And so the idea, of course, for Taylor was to create managerial power without making workers create collective opposition. And so there's a very deft thing that goes on here to create your labor force that's like, maybe not happy, but they're not mad at you, while also giving managers the ability to be able to, like, more efficiently, I'm putting that in quotation marks, more efficiently be able to manage what the outputs are.
Yeah.
Obviously, we do this at a high level because all the algorithm stuff right now is just Taylorism plus computers, right?
Yeah,
That's
right.
that's the most simplistic way to understand what's happening.
One of the things that stood out that I don't think it had been distilled this way to me. It's when you're building that kind of data layer, which, eventually became algorithms. I mean, it was algorithms back then too, but more sophisticated algorithms today. There's no one to take the blame because there's so much of a gap between the workers, supervisors, and management. Management's learning all of this data and everything's coming back up. But, it's the algorithm's fault. Like, if something happens on the floor or whatever, the algorithm did it. You don't have to take any sort of responsibility for it. And that even further consolidates that power in that upper strata of management. It's just so, like, I sit here and I want to give humans the benefit of the doubt that they're not doing this to basically create another form of slavery that doesn't look as much like slavery because someone's getting some money even though they can't live off of it. But it's just that subjugation it seems so purposeful. And when you see things like how Taylor wrote that framework and how it's been applied and how far it's been taken, like, man, it really doesn't make me want to be a capitalist. It really, like.
And what's funny about this, because you're touching on this a lot, and I agree for the record, but I want to engage with this. So somebody listening to this and thinking to themselves, oh man, but I love the market and the market is right. And you can't deny all the good things that have happened. I'm going to concede you, naysayer, that, right? Like, you're not in this conversation, but I'm going to concede you that. The bottom line of what Joel's saying and what this book's talking about, and really what these arguments are, or where ultimately we can say is that these things don't have to operate this way.
Right.
You could still have all of this stuff without it being extractive.
Right.
Right. And through my writing and a lot of the work I've been doing over the last year, really beyond this consequence design idea, which we won't even get into in this talk at all, is talking about something like disintermediation, which is really about using technology to remove human relationships and expertise that we have as humans, right? And use it to depend on platforms instead. Using technology to be the intermediary, because if the machine learns what I know how to do once, it can do 80% of what I can do. That 20% is the most valuable part of what I can do. But you, the person designing the algorithm, do not care about that. All those edge cases, your example about not being able to have someone to interfere or intervene when something's bad is my biggest, like the biggest argument that I make is that people on the ground should be able to leverage their common sense to solve solvable problems.
Right.
Like, I always use the example that I remember of that's most salient for me is being a kid at the department store, having a problem on the floor, I want to speak to a manager, because you know as the customer that the manager is empowered to probably solve your problem. You and I both worked a lot of retail growing up into our college years. And so we both know that even if you were the key holder, forget even being an assistant manager, you had
Yeah.
enough of ability to be like, hey, look, if somebody comes in, if something's broken or they need a refund, go ahead and deal with it, because it's easier to solve the problem at this level.
Yep.
And what I say is, what I appreciate about that model isn't even that the managers allowed it. It's that the companies understood at their level that I would rather have you refund someone $50, $100, one off. Like, someone's going to grift you. Eventually, you'll be smart enough to stop that. But I would rather you do that than have to deal with unhappy customers or long lines or other problems that are going to cause the company a much bigger problem. And
Right.
so I love that that was the world we grew up in.
Yeah.
That world really doesn't exist anymore.
Mm-mm.
Maybe at your local coffee shop, maybe. But increasingly, that's less of a thing, that people these days are less adept at being able to navigate
Right.
that. And
Yeah.
it's really wild to me, because we solved this. We already solved it. We did it. We saw it. And
Right.
now we're retreating to this other place. It's really interesting to me.
Yeah, and it's not about customer service or hospitality or any sort of public goodwill. It's about more revenue for, whatever the corporation is. And the knock-on effect of outsourcing that to the algorithm to be as efficient as possible is, well, sure, yeah, you've increased that revenue and it's going to keep getting as efficient as possible. It's going to keep tightening that screw, right? On the other side of it, those people at the top that put the algorithm in place can still go home and sleep at night because they know they didn't make the decision. The algorithm's running everything. They can be the talking head on television and they can do the interviews and seem like a person, come across as a human being. But I look at all these structures, I look at the emphasis on efficiency, especially in tech, because those are the circles that we run in now, right? And it worries me when I see civic organizations being taken over by technology CEOs or like those people coming in to help make that sort of thing efficient. Because efficiency in, say, government, like government's designed to be bureaucratic because it deals with real people and affects real people. It's not just about making money. And so when you put that sort of application of efficiency and revenue and savings beyond all at all costs, and take away that humanity, you're no longer building organizations that are for the people they were built to serve anymore, right? There's a reason bureaucracy exists, and it exists to make sure that there are checks and balances on that, to make sure that people actually still have a voice, that people are actually heard and are present in the process. And I think the same thing applies to businesses. It's those small hometown businesses that have real people in them. They're the ones we like, the ones that we normal people like going to, and they're the businesses we still frequent. It's the cold technology-based ones that we don't. And you see it with social media. Like, you see it with the public circles that we're in online, and how at some point they get to this point where the algorithms start to just make it cold and no longer appealing to you. And then you complain about, my Twitter feed is whatever, and Facebook got too, salesy. And I mean, my Instagram's got all kinds of ads in it. It's like all that kind of stuff just kind of piles on, and it doesn't just affect the people that are working in it, though it probably affects them the most. It starts to trickle into how we think as a society and as a culture, and it makes us more accepting of things that really aren't good for us and really aren't good for the rest of society.
Wow. To be fair, friends, this is how we talk to each other. So, like, we don't need a book to do this. This is literally how we engage. It'd be a little bit less dense, but this is basically just how we would roll normally. So I think as it relates to sewing up the rest of this book, I think that, really appreciated the relative pithiness of it. I think it's relatively accessible as a book relative to a topic like this. I read a lot of books about this kind of stuff, relative to logistics and things like that. And this is a pretty approachable, I feel like, book.
The Marxist
around this
labor theory.
topic.
Marxist labor
Yeah.
theory is a little bit dense, so like be
Sure,
prepared for
yeah.
that if you're jumping in. Like, you might.
I think most people
Helps
just skip
have
that
back-
stuff, and you can
helps
just
have
skip that
background.
and get to the thing. This is the book you can skip around, I feel like, and just engage with the parts that are interesting to you. Say you're someone who's like hella into Instacart and you use all these platforms and you love this stuff all the time, and it doesn't occur to you why they're so bad. And I think something like this could be really interesting for you to kind of engage with the higher levels of this, because this isn't about today. This is about the world that your kids or your friends' kids will grow up in. I think that's the thing. And it's not about, I am definitely on the record as a naysayer and as a critic of a lot of things. So I want to be very, very clear about my bona fides here, that I think all this shit is toxic and shouldn't exist.
Yeah.
But it's too late. It already exists and it's going to continue to proliferate. So we, as individuals living in this world, have to ask ourselves, where are the bright lines to being able to say, okay, it's going to happen, it's going to exist. AI, large language models, this stuff's going to exist. But it doesn't mean it has to exist in the framing that the people who are flooding our markets with it have to exist with it. We can say there are ways to be able to, New York City is basically banned Airbnbs. And people, of course, hate that if they're visiting New York City, but the residents love it. And I think that's great for people that live in these places to decide, you know what, we tried it, there are pros, but the cons don't work for us.
Yeah.
And so here in this place, we're not going to allow that. And we see that with other things. And so I'm glad we chose this as our first book. I think that, to your point, this is definitely not a moderate tome. This book is definitely from a perspective of definitely the left wing.
Yeah.
So do engage with it with that understanding.
Yeah.
But I do think that no matter where you stand in that spectrum of things, or if you don't engage that spectrum at all, I think that there are still really salient things for you to get from how things, like, this isn't made up. These things are actually happening in the real world. And we as users of these platforms and these tools need to contend with what is happening, because, to summarize sort of a lot of my research and a lot of my work on this is really just like the externalities of these platforms, all the delivery drivers, all the delivery food and all these things. Your communities are having to contend with this, and it's costing people jobs, their livelihoods, their dignity. And over time, your community is going to continue to deal with this because your society wasn't meant for that. I'm disengaging with any of Joel's discussion about bureaucracy right now.
I know
we're in a very weird time of bureaucracy, and I don't want to get on a separate rant. But, once we have Patreon, you can get that in the separate edition of our show, because then I'll go ham then. But we're not there yet. But to that point, we really are seeing this post-pandemic. We're seeing the side effects of what it looks like to be in the early stages of the gilded platform age, and how the externalities of this are wrought onto our hometowns and onto our states. And we really have to start contending with this, because it's not going to improve if we don't figure out what the costs are of letting all of this stuff just dump all over our towns.
Yep.
When the laws, the policies, and the society haven't caught up with it yet. We haven't caught up with this yet. So we have a lot of work to do.
We do. And I also want to point out, along with that, Ron, like, I think that Craig Gent, in writing this, he's actually fairly optimistic, and he's way more optimistic than I am about most things, which is why I kind of like latched onto those more darker, insidious sort of points that he made. He opens it up for us to have ideas about how to fix this stuff, right? And so, like, that is the point of this book. He's not just all doom and gloom. It's a factual account. Like you said, it's a factual account of what is going on. It's an exploration and complete critical engaging with how different management philosophies are integrated into this and are perpetuating these sorts of things. He goes on to talk about how these systems can be disrupted by the workers, by those of us that are on the outside. Like, there are ways to contend with this, but it does call out for us to do something about it. I'm hoping that this podcast and the future books we read and the conversations that we have, I'm hoping that inspires some sort of thought and conversation around these topics. And for the record, I want to be involved in it. So, like, if you're listening to this or a future show, like, come at us, like, bring us some ideas and some questions. Like, let's have additional conversations. Let's keep this going.
Seconded. Speaking of our next book, so you can already get started reading, because we're going to be reading it and then we're going to talk about it.
Yeah.
It's Liz Pelly's new book called Mood Machine, The Rise of Spotify and the Cost of the Perfect Playlist. Joel and I really became true friends because our shared love of music, our shared love of playlists and stuff.
Yes.
So we're really excited to dig into this one. We know Spotify sucks. They've ruined their old platform. Spoiler alert. But I am really excited to see, to read this book. I bought it, but I haven't really delved into all of it yet. And I'm really excited to dive in and talk about this topic.
And, it lets us look at a different side of algorithms and what algorithms are doing for us. So I'm also stoked. So make sure you find that book. We'll put a link to, I don't know, we'll find out how to get the authors some money off of these sales beyond just the normal stuff. We'll put a link in the show notes. If you want to grab that book, do it, read along, join us next time. And hopefully we'll have have a good conversation that you can feel more actively participated in.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening to the Future Perfect Book Club.
Future Perfect Book Club is produced by Jessica Goodman. Our theme song is by Joel Goodman with drums from Mike Petroff. You can find us on the web and on Blue Sky at futureperfectbook.club.